a whole lot of progress in a very short amount of time and have a very solid recommendation in place. And really the intent of, if I turn that way, it gets quite boomy. The intent of today's meeting is to make sure that we have some consensus. We've really tried to incorporate a lot of the key themes that we've heard throughout this process and in our meetings and follow-up conversations. As you all know, there's a lot to consider. And then there's some limitations of the program and funds and timing. So we really tried to balance that to get some best practices to allow the city to move forward toward implementing the fund. So today, what I want to do is do a quick review about some of those limitations of the ARPA funds, the qualified census tracts, kind of remind us that this is in the context of hopefully some additional funds and efforts in the coming years and months. And I just want to walk through the recommendations and have a discussion. This is a little bit less formal, not that we've been super formal, but a little bit less formal than some of the prior ones. I just have slides to help remind what's in the memo that was sent through them. I do have an example of how a scoring matrix in the beginning of evaluating projects might look. And then, at the end of the day, I want to ask the question again, do we have consensus? Are we comfortable moving forward with this recommendation to the city manager so that we can start with him engaging city council, doing some more outreach through the DABs and hopefully some more neighborhood level outreach as this moves toward implementation. So that's the point today. Again, this committee was formed to help the city manager understand a good direction to create a fund to meet housing needs, particularly housing needs and challenges created by COVID. We've had a couple more opportunities come to light in the last few months that we've talked through that have complicated the discussion, but in a very good way. And then the recommendations we'll present to council, I believe, in January after the holidays, after the new council members are sworn in. And then it will move to, there's going to be more public review and comment. And then, so the key questions, I touched on this. Do you support the recommendations? Are you comfortable moving forward? That's really what we need to know. And then we can talk through some refinements and so forth. So to start, next slide, please. So one of the things we didn't touch on as much as we were having these discussions, because we're trying to cover so much, is one of the requirements of ARPA funds is that they be spent in qualified census tracts, or you have to document a disproportional impact of COVID on whomever you're serving. For simplicity and efficiency, because we know there's a lot of impact in the qualified census tracts. The light blue are the areas that qualify for the use of the ARPA funds in the Affordable Housing Fund. So I just wanted to put that up there. And as we've talked throughout the process, well, starting with the second meeting when these tools came to light, as the city is able to sell the housing authority portfolio, we're going to be able to raise additional funds for future efforts and maybe expanding efforts in affordable housing. So this is kind of the first phase and the start. And so we want to start it well, but start it soon in the right way. And so that's just the bigger picture. And there's a lot more conversations about, what other capacity, infrastructure and support is needed. Next, please. So, I want to talk through the key elements and stop for a discussion. And one of the things I didn't mention, this meeting is open to the public. We have some members of the public who are not on the committee, kind of like the last few meetings. This is an opportunity to observe the discussion, and we'll have time for public comment at the end. And so the goal statement that we created, kind of trying to balance everything, is that the Affordable Housing Fund is designed to improve the quality of the existing affordable housing stock while expanding quality affordable options and promoting neighborhood stability in Wichita core areas. How does that sound? Or anything missing, or we don't necessarily need to wordsmith, and you can absolutely follow up with thoughts, but does that capture what we've been talking about? See a lot of nods. So, and then we wanted to add a strategy statement to communicate, as this moves, more public in the coming months. This is a short-term strategy to start to leverage the ARPA funds, but create a system and a process where this can, account for those new funds that come into play and potential other efforts that come as their successes and people continue to work on affordable housing in our community. Next, please. And so the program priorities, to really help guide this initial phase, we kind of drilled it down to six items. Projects that renovate WH Housing Authority homes, projects within we picked a 1/4 mile radius to maximize impact in a more concentrated area since we do have limited funds. Projects located in formerly redlined areas within the qualified census tracts. Projects that create those sustainable home ownership opportunities. That's been a constant theme of our discussions. Projects that leverage other funding sources, so we kind of maximize the impact of limited funds that we have. And projects that also, where site control or ownership's already in place or can easily be in place so that they can move quickly because of the timeline we're dealing with here. And I would add that, rental housing, quality housing is a key part of this as well. Next, please. So real quickly, this was added in the memo, the second version of the memo. So if you haven't seen it, what this shows is the Wichita Housing Authority homes located within the ECA and shades where the qualified census tracts are. And in the memo, we have the exact number of homes in this area. But this is where the focus would be, using the Housing Authority homes as a key resource in terms of providing that quality affordable housing. So you can see the different clusters and the buffer around it where you could see projects that provide infill housing or projects that provide home repair services. So you could see partner organizations working together to renovate Housing Authority homes, build some new infill homes, and help existing homeowners with home repair to have more of an impact in those smaller neighborhood areas. And just one quick note, the floodplain doesn't show well here, but there's some of these homes that wouldn't be eligible in this cluster there. So that's kind of the thought about putting that buffer on and giving priority to projects that are in these areas. Now, again, projects that aren't in these areas are also eligible as long as they're in the QCT's qualified census tracts. But these would be the priority areas to maximally leverage the funds. The second map just highlights the redlined areas. I believe there's about 60 Housing Authority homes in the redlined areas. So there's 200 and some total within the qualified census tracts. So there's plenty to work with and kind of strategize around for the development community. So those are the program priorities. I wanted to pause here for any comment or reflection. Are those the right priorities? Is there any reactions from the group? If not, we can keep moving. So then, excuse me, it gets very dry. I talk. We wanted to highlight, and this is going back to the funds we highlighted in that memo and our work in some other communities, kind of getting to some specific levels so we can see how this will work. What are eligible uses? What are eligible users? And what are those affordability parameters? So when somebody submits an application, they can see if they have a reasonable proposal. So eligible uses, we're talking about single family renovation or rehab. We talked about focusing these funds on single family versus multifamily in this initial rollout because of the limited funds available. One of the things we added was we can support rental housing, but because of the challenge in placing long-term affordability requirements on projects just through ARPA funds, we think it's important that rental projects also have are participating in another program that requires that long-term affordability, because we want to preserve as much affordable housing, quality affordable housing as possible beyond 2026 when the ARPA fund deadline is. So rental projects that also leverage low-income housing tax credits, either 9% or 4%, or receive Section 8, project-based Section 8 vouchers, would get priority in a review process in this fund. Home repair is a big priority of helping existing homeowners, particularly those who may have had to defer more maintenance because of COVID-related expenses or lack of income for existing low-income homeowners. Housing services, we talked about what those mean, credit counseling, maybe even tenant assistance, financial counseling, et cetera. And then new construction, affordable single-family homes, particularly within that buffer of housing authority homes that may be renovated. So to really allow funds to go toward new construction infill and support what's already going on in many of these neighborhoods. When we move to eligible users, this is a little bit more straightforward. For-profit and nonprofit developers and housing service providers, which are normally nonprofit organizations. We do a lot of funds initially try to work with organizations or individuals with a strong track record of delivering quality housing and quality services that aren't behind on obligations with existing public funds and so forth. So that's part of the application process, is how long have you been doing this? And what's your kind of, maybe not success rate, but something along those lines. And in terms of affordability, normally these funds aren't as stringent as CDBG or HUD funds or home funds and so forth. So generally, we've set some requirements that to keep these going to affordable housing and so forth. For sale opportunities up to 80% of area median income. Rental would target 60% or below, with priority to 50% or below, to help address the significant need for quality, affordable rental housing. Then home repair and housing services would generally be up to 80% of AMI.
Like the new construction, what about if they want so like if they want to purchase that in one of the targeted areas, maybe like down
yes. Yes.
No, not rehab, it would be purchasing, it'd be a new home. Or
Mhm. Right, right. The answer is yes. You are still sharing, Justin. Um, Under housing services, like an organization could apply for a grant for down payment assistance. Correct. Because we anticipate that some of the housing authority homes will be renovated for homeownership. And there may be some quality homes in the area that just need down payment assistance for the buyer to do it. And I think that's an eligible use. Next, please. Justin, could you go back, please? Sorry.
So can you see the slide with the eligible uses, eligible users and affordability?
Yes,
Is that the one you want me on?
yes.
Okay.
That is correct. The question was if it's only for single family uses and not multifamily. And that is the discussion to help focus the ARPA funds. But multifamily would be included in the discussion for, as the fund is built up with other funds. Yes. Anything else before we move on? Next, please. And really just wanted to illustrate what those income limits mean, and really on household size and so a four-person household, looking at a home ownership program could earn up to $60,000 a year for a home ownership opportunity. For rental, at 50% AMI, that four-person household would be $37,900. This is just for context. The median household income in Wichita metro areas nearly $55,000. So, and it varies according to household size. So we're really able to, serve a lot of the population. There should be plenty of qualified households, but the intent is to get more quality units out there. And then the next element is, having a cap on what a project can receive. So, people aren't applying for all of the $5 million. Generally, what we've seen, and we've discussed this some, is home repair, to really get at fixing some of the challenges people are facing, getting up to $25,000 per homeowner is very helpful, because then you can really start to address a roof and plumbing challenges and HVAC versus just maybe part of one of them nowadays with where costs are. Renovation and a lot of places we're seeing a per unit cap of $40,000 to $50,000 a unit. This is an area we can dive deeper as the policies developed, but with construction costs and some of the condition needs in the neighborhood, we thought $50,000 a unit would be helpful. For new construction, for projects located within a quarter-mile buffer of the housing authority homes, again, if somebody renovates housing authority homes and somebody else has 5 lots in that same area, they could get a boost of up to $200 a unit, just for the construction piece. and hopefully have, down payment assistance from another source to leverage to help with the development gap there. Is there any, Byron? It's not in the memo and should be in part of the recommendation. The question was, for those of you online, do we have a differentiation, a definition between what's home repair versus what's renovation? Generally speaking, we view home repair as kind of those critical housing infrastructure that maybe you don't see. So we could spend $25,000, as you know, on the HVAC system and weatherization, but you don't see it. But those are critical needs for the safety of the home. Renovation can get into more of those cosmetic and modernization things. Could be upgrade, a remodel of a home so it's marketable to today's standards. In some of the housing authority homes, we talked about knocking down a wall because the bedrooms are tiny in some of the bigger homes, redoing the kitchen, etc. So it wouldn't just be placing the plumbing stack, which would be a home repair item, but could be part of and should be part of a renovation. Yes, at some point that will be written out, yes.
Andy, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, Justin.
Okay. Yeah, Tony had a question. For new construction, can the 50,000 be used solely for a down payment, or does it have to be used for other costs?
Um, for new construction, what I'm showing there is for, in my mind, that's for the development cost, not down payment. But it depends on the applicant. If a developer's proposing, that could be used to fill the development gap. Or it could be an organization that wants it to go to down payment assistance. Or it could be a blend. So there's some flexibility there.
Well, the down payment assistance would be more like a grant, right? Or a loan. Or a forgivable loan, maybe.
It would typically would be more like a forgivable loan, or after a certain period of time.
And that was my other question is, are most of the fund products loans, at least until we get to the services portion? The
Yes.
services are more like grants, but these are all like loans. Correct?
Yes, and we'll get to that.
Okay.
But if a business demo, there's a customer credit education, and those sorts of. Definitely that something that has that framework.
There's a broad framework. It's one of the eligible uses, and an organization can apply for a certain amount to serve a certain number of people. I think the intent is that we want to prepare new homeowners to be successful. And especially if other funds are leveraged, credit counseling is required and some of those services. We want to make sure those are available. So it is an eligible use that we would love to see an application, to offer those programs alongside and getting units ready. That's a great question and part of the administration conversation, and I'll go ahead and start that now. And we talked.
Andy, can you repeat the question? We couldn't quite hear it. I'm sorry, that mic didn't seem to really catch anything for us.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Now I'm live.
There we
The
go.
question was, within the memo, there is a line that talks about education and resources for new homeowners, such as homeowner credit counseling, budget information, and also rent and landlord mitigation and education. My question was, is that framework already built out within this plan? And if so, are you looking for a local nonprofit or organization to come in with a proposal plan to support that? Or are you going to, or are the administrators from the city of Wichita going to support that through their efforts?
Great. Again, great question. We were discussing this yesterday with the city, and what we're seeing in a lot of funds as it is ideal for local nonprofits to apply for the funds, receive the grant, and then the nonprofit administers it. The city's role would primarily be to administer the ARPA funds and make sure their partner organizations are using them for what they're supposed to be using them for affordable housing and related services. So I think in this case, the city would be primarily the grantor or funder, as we'll get to in a little bit, and the developers and partner organizations, local nonprofits will really administer the programs, whether it's home repair, whether it's tenant services or anything like that.
And last question on this one, I think, is there a standard or I won't want to say a rule, but will there be a standard held that developers and individuals that are working on those home repair projects then coordinate with those nonprofits to serve in an entire wraparound service for that individual that is receiving either the home repair or the new home?
We have not gotten into that level of detail.
Okay, fair enough.
That would be an important part of the policy and evaluation of proposals. The intent is to be as holistic as possible and connect those dots. In some cases, it may not be as possible, but I think that is something that should receive priority in the funding discussion.
Great, thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions on this section of eligible users, uses, funding caps, et cetera? I'm going to let Justin finish that sentence. So the next thing I wanted to talk through briefly is, so we're starting to get applications in a few months is probably too aggressive, but say in a few months, we're starting to get applications. What does the review process look like? What are the checks and balances? One of the things that Tulsa and a number of the other funds do is a pre-application information session that lays out, a lot of what we're talking about here. Here's what this is for. Here's some of the parameters. here's what we want to see in your application. Here's, just something for a successful application that has a good chance of going to committee and being considered for funding. Then after that, you receive the applications. We're thinking there will be a full-time staff person to administer this with some support. And they'll review it and score it and kind of summarize the application. A lot of these are set up to be pretty flexible. A lot of them will have follow-up conversations with the applicant to say, hey, before we review this in more detail with the committee, we need X, Y, and Z, or why did you do this? Just to understand. And it's more of a conversation. And, once staff reviews it, we're still kind of thinking through how an administrative process would work here. We're thinking it could work for home repair projects, especially for individual homeowners. And the administrative process would essentially be streamlined because would be a set limit where as long as staff reviews it, gets kind of a majority approval from the committee, it goes on to being funded without city council review and blessing as well. The full review process would be for larger projects, and really, I believe council wants to review a lot of where the ARPA funds are going. So that would be, a development project would go to the city council, but there'd be a lot of room between application and going to council for some refinement. But basically, it would go from staff to the review committee. They would notify the applicant that they're recommending an award, kind of work on a draft agreement to go to council, because then council can sign off on everything and then get it to funding. It's a time and process factor there, but also checks and balances and making sure that it meets the priorities of the program. In a lot of places, again, like I said, this is flexible. At any point in the process, you could see a line going back to application. There could be, and in our scoring example that we have later, there could be a case where project just isn't quite there, but maybe in the next cycle. We're talking about quarterly reviews for the full process. So maybe the next cycle, they figure out some things. They have some financing in place, or they're able to get some sketches of what they're doing or something like that, where it becomes more of a full picture of what they're doing and a stronger proposal. So how would the program be administered on a daily basis? We think you'll at least need one full-time staff person. Most of the funds have one or two people. I could say we were working alongside in Tulsa as they launched the fund. They have a full-time staff person who's probably working like two people. But they also have, there's legal support, underwriting support through partner institutions. Having that set up at the beginning to help with the whole process really helps that staff person. And there's a lot of internal expertise as well, particularly in the housing department and so forth. But they would work with the committee at the very beginning to develop policy that hammers out a lot of the details that we've been talking a little bit about here. They would develop the pre-application materials, communicate with applicants, review the scores, and then summarize the applications, schedule and lead the discussions, present the recommendations to council, prepare draft agreements and work with legal department on those, and then just all the ongoing communications, making sure there's monitoring. In Tulsa, we've helped them set up, data they're going to collect to see the long-term impact of the fund there, who it's serving, making sure it's hitting those targets over time. Excuse me. And so forth. That also coordinate with those partners we mentioned as well. Any thoughts or questions on how this might look once it gets formed and started? Or any thoughts on what would be nice to see for the city to incorporate?
So I promise I won't hammer too hard home on this over and over again. But somewhere in that process for the applicant, one of the things that we consider when we look at a community conditions report is that housing is not a siloed issue or a siloed root cause for many of these individuals. So somewhere along in the process, I would love to see connection to other resources, again, that holistic care, that wraparound service, so that we're not just putting somebody in a new house and not addressing any other needs or issues or barriers to resources that might exist.
Absolutely. Very good point.
I guess just a clarification for me, when it says initial review and scoring by the sole, I'm assuming the sole employee or maybe two people, would they have complete control over what's being put in front of the committee? In terms of, what the committee approves and what the city council eventually approves, I believe that's part of the process. Or are they really just they're going to take the deep dive to read the whole thing and assign scores to it and then just, doing the initial, is this a yes or no, and then sending it back sort of process?
The project manager, whatever we'll call them, is a conduit of information. They would not be asked to leave any applicants out, but would pass the information to the committee. The way it's worked in Tulsa is very much, like, here's the applications we received. These are the complete ones. And this is the conversation we're having with so-and-so because they didn't provide a pro forma or things like that.
So Andy, in some way, did the staff there help facilitate the process in terms of giving it an initial review, and people on the committee will always have the full packet so that they can go through it and make their own determinations, but at least helps them get a start on it. Is that?
Yes, it's to help synthesize the information, which apparently I can't. And, just to help process and have those discussions before it goes to committee that might complete an application. So it is a project, or have the conversation that, maybe this isn't together for next month's meeting, but let's target the one in 4 months or something like that. But the conduit of information.
Andy, this is Valerie Black, and I may have missed this, but how will the review committee be selected, or is there a process for that?
I was actually thought about that this morning, and we haven't gotten that far yet. I'm curious what your recommendation would be. I know there's a couple different ways the city does it, but
right. I just wonder if folks from the community will be invited or at least considered for the committee. And also maybe depending on where the focus will be, leaders in that community as well.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Valerie. Any other thoughts, questions around administration, best practices you'd like to see? Okay. The next item we wanted to talk about is that grant versus forgivable loan question. And, initially I was thinking because of the period for ARPA funds, they have to be committed by end of 2024 and dispersed by the end of 2026, that it should just be grants. And then in discussion with the city and Sally pointed out, like, let's have some form of recourse or protection for the city and for the recipients to try to limit, there could be predatory situations I didn't even think of. Not that I think of everything, but something I, forgot about that, somebody could try to cold call household and say, I've got these funds to renovate your home, and then do something that we don't want to see. So, and a lot of programs do have forgivable loans, but in the context of ARPA funds, I wasn't sure that's possible. Our current reading of the guidelines, which if you want to get a good night's sleep, be sure to read them before bed. But the current reading of the guidelines is so long as, the recourse period ends before, December 31st, 2026, a forgivable loan is something that can be done. And so I'll start there since I was talking about it. We're thinking it'd be a 0% loan. It would be, in second position, subordinate to a bank loan. It would be designed to be forgiven before September 30th, 2026. So if there is in the kind of lower percentage chance that it would be recaptured, it could be, dispersed. So the city would not have to pay it back to the federal government, which is that is a provision in the ARPA funds. It would be secured by a lien on the property or something like that. So when the obligations were met, it would be released. There would be clawback provisions. So, let's say it's, a down payment assistance of $30,000. The family has to move to another state. So there'd be a percentage that would be forgiven and a percentage paid back if it happened, for instance, in 2 years. That's pretty common in programs like this. But as of September 30th, 2026, otherwise it would be forgiven. So this could be used for new construction, the development projects. It could be used on home repair funds that go directly to a homeowner, and would probably be an ask in a grant agreement for if an organization is doing the home repair program, just to have that there. It could also be for rental housing, the renovations and so forth for a rental housing unit. The loan would be forgiven, so long as all the affordability requirements were met through 2026, but it would still be affordable because of the other programs that are required, the low income housing tax credits or Section 8 or otherwise.
Yes, I have a question. This is Valerie again. I just wonder, for the case studies like Tulsa, did they show any hesitation with landlords wanting to participate in the programs or receive the funds?
To my knowledge to date, landlords have not directly applied for Affordable Housing Trust Fund monies. A nonprofit has received a grant, I believe, to provide, blanking on the term, but it's a landlord incentive that provides up to $3,000 in missed rent or damages to encourage more landlords to lend to individuals with Section 8 vouchers, or perhaps a negative aspect on their credit check and background check.
Andy, there's another question. Will the recipients have to meet any minimum requirements, credit score, payment history, et cetera?
That is which applicants, like the the organizations applying for the funds to do development or provide services, or like tenants or homeowners?
Potential homeowners.
I think that would be a decision of the organization, applying for the funds to work with those homeowners. I'm not sure the city wants to put forth a minimum credit score.
You know what I'm talking about? So if whatever their property's valued at, and then if they already have a first mortgage on it, and then if
Right.
you're looking at the equity, do they have enough equity to do the second lien? That's just the question I had. Because you don't want them to get in, and be upside down, basically. Say, for instance, if they move, or if they
Right.
sell their home and they're gonna have to pay this back. You want to make sure that they're not going to have to pay more than what they actually had, what their house is actually worth,
Mhm.
as far as paying the first mortgage off and then having to pay the second. So I guess that's part of it. Maybe that's part of the administration part,
Yes, but
That's-
it's a
that's
really
part
good
conversation.
point, and how these would be considered, or
Mm-hmm.
applications would go. Sally, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm curious your thoughts there, because you've done those with the federal monies.
Generally, we're not looking at the equity. What we're doing now, though, is a much lesser dollar amount. You are definitely increasing it,
Yeah.
up to the $25,000 mark. But remember, it's all that debt is going to disappear September 30th, 2026, no matter what. So that's something to take into consideration for that. Now, if you're talking renovation and the end homeowners related to, for example, a developer purchases some WHA properties and then makes them available for homeowners, their primary lender is absolutely going to be running credit checks and backgrounds. That's why the readiness courses and classes are really necessary, because that's never going to go anywhere without the primary lender being on board, for sure. For repair programs, yeah, we've never run credits and generally don't look at the equity issue, especially when you have a short turnaround on the when the loans are forgiven.
I would say that's a really good follow-up conversation, because I know you're in lending and have worked on projects like this, but maybe there are some guidelines. Right.
Andy, I hope you can hear me. What are you talking about when you put the clawback provision in?
That's normally kind of a tiered repayment. So like a certain percentage, let's say you get the $25,000 in home repair next month, and you need to move in 3 years. So there would be some percentage of that would be forgiven in year 3, and some percentage that would be you'd be required to pay back. That was some of what we're having the discussion about right now. Like, is there enough equity to cover that? How do we set up that requirement? So is that a requirement we want? And how do we set it up so it doesn't overly burden, a low to moderate income new homeowner?
I had a question about occupancy, if there will be any occupancy requirements with this. So for example, with an FHA loan, it has to be your primary residence. So meaning it can't be a secondary home. You can't take advantage of that loan product that has a lower down payment, lower interest rate on it, and use it for something like a rental property. I know that that this proposal is targeting landlords and maybe giving them a boost to come in and do some things in the neighborhood. But I also want to balance that with individuals who might just hold the property and not live in it and take advantage of this and not really make that accessible to other people in the community.
I think that is a really great point and something that we do need to spell out in the recommendation and the policy. It is intended to be occupied by people we're trying to provide better housing for, not speculators or Airbnbs. And if somebody did an Airbnb and, and the monitoring should catch that, and they would have to pay back the funds.
The question is, would it be monitored? Is that? So the question is, would it be monitored? And if they got the funds, how would you know that they're using it for different use? One of the things would be if there was a complaint that was turned in by a neighbor and it starts to go through the city process, and we bust them for a zoning violation. That's just one route.
On the rental housing side, because at least in this phase, it'd be required to also have tax credit or project-based Section 8, there would already be that monitoring in place that would cover that kind of item. For the home ownership, really after 2026, it's hopefully the original household, if they sold it, they use that equity and buy another home and have a stable situation. Because for home ownership, it's a lot harder to control, particularly past the hard cutoff of December 31st, 2026.
This is a really good discussion. Now Justin needs to catch up. Just kidding.
He's doing great. And I will say, so yeah, there are some nuances and particulars of the forgivable loan that need to work out and would have to go, legal department and with Sally's department, and there may be new guidance from ARPA. Hopefully not too different than what it is now, but there are some details to work out, and I appreciate that you all are going there and asking those questions. For grants, those would be primarily for the various types of housing services, which include down payment assistance. An organization would say, I'm proposing $500,000 to help up to 20 homeowners with down payment assistance, and we're also going to do the credit counseling and financial assistance and home repair training and all of those things. And that would be a grant, the way grants are normally done. Any other thoughts or questions on grants versus forgivable loans? I bought Justin a little time there. I believe next is kind of an example of, it's not kind of an example, it is an example of how a project may be looked at. And again, this is an example I came up with to have this discussion and think through how it might be scored and how the discussion may proceed from the initial scoring. You might remember this from a couple sessions ago. This was one of the pilot projects we looked at and had the conversation about how far could these funds go. And so let's say, for instance, the North Minnesota properties, this. I avoided.
Suggestion,
Yeah.
if your eyesight's going like my eyesight, and you want to stand up and walk up closer to the screen, please feel free to,
Yeah.
because I think I'm going to need to.
So I was trying to look at how many homes, and I think it's 42 housing units in this kind of focused area. And so, and hopefully this will be, these clusters of homes will be issued as, an RFP with the Housing Authority and paired with the Affordable Housing Fund to renovate these for, could be home ownership or rental or a combination thereof. And so this project is in an area and would have a lot of factors that meet a lot of the priorities we've been talking about. First of all, because they are housing authority homes. Secondly, they're located in a qualified census tract. And so I thought it would be good to see how this would score. And this is a handout that was on the table because I knew you wouldn't be able to see it. And I adapted this scoring matrix from Tulsa. Again, we worked with them on this and refining it, but I kind of changed it to reflect the discussions we've been having here. I'm going to go to the screen so I can kind of see it. I have my bifocals on order. I'm there already. So the first couple questions are, is this in a qualified census tract? Because if the answer is no, and this would probably be answered before somebody would go to use this checklist. Is it in the ECA? Just some yes, no's that could throw out some projects. And then talking through, different scoring levels for, how much of the project cost is it? Do we want to fund half of a project? Well, maybe the answer is yes, if it meets a lot of the criteria and is a catalytic project to really help the area and help households get into stable housing. What's the mix of affordable units? Is it 100% affordable? Is it mixed income? What scoring levels do we give to those different factors? How long will it be affordable? And I put this as more on the rental side. It's going to be a minimum of 15 years, but do we give a bonus or more score toward projects that will be affordable through land use restriction longer? Unit size, and I left the language here from Tulsa. There may be different because we're talking about single family. We probably aren't talking about a lot of new construction, 1-bedroom homes, but that's a consideration of what's the target market and what are their housing needs. Is it 3- and 4-bedroom homes, 2- and 3-bedroom homes? So we can score it there. Thinking through project readiness, because we are dealing with a time frame and we want to get units out there as soon as possible, quality units. So is it ready? Is it an purchase option or is it a contract? Is it tentatively approved to be purchased by the housing authority? Those kind of considerations. The zoning for proposed use might not apply as much in this phase, but might in a later phase. But and then in terms of project readiness, are there plans for the housing authority homes? Yes. Is there a scope of work? And some of those other things, and what, how soon can they start moving dirt or moving drywall? And then, and this is something that would need to be developed more, but a little bit of background on the organization. Is it strong track record, a positive cash flow, a good financial health? Those kind of things we know about organizations that set them up for success in terms of completing a project, because there are some implications for the city if a project is funded and not completed. There's some recourse to the Treasury and that we don't want to trigger. And then there could be bonus points, or these could be incorporated back into the total score. But does the project include the housing authority homes? Are the units more deeply affordable? Do they incorporate universal design to help with those with physical disabilities or limitations? Are their energy efficiency that helps with long-term affordability and utilities? These are some other things that can be considered that might give a particular project a recommendation over another one, because it just has more of these factors that are appealing and meet the priorities, and again, set people up for long-term success. I think something to think about incorporating is those additional services that are included, the partnerships with organizations, what'll be done for preparing people for home ownership in this example, et cetera. So those are just some of the ideas here. Again, this would be refined at the onset of the program launch with staff and committee. So I ran the pilot project through this using just my scoring. Again, sorry, it's hard to read here. But for sale, there were 96 total points. This scored 90 because it met a lot of those priorities. Project readiness, affordability, 100% affordable, so maintaining affordable homes, et cetera. It gets a number of bonus points as well. And then I thought it'd be good to think about a different kind of proposal we might get. Tulsa got a lot of different ones, at least in the initial round, as people were figuring out what this is. So let's look at an alternate project. Let's say somebody has some homes scattered. Maybe it's in Southwest Wichita. They want to keep 40% of them affordable. The location characteristics are similar to the Housing Authority pilot project. They have a purchase option, but don't have them closed because maybe it's contingent on funding. They don't have architectural drawings. They don't have a detailed scope of work. Maybe they've been doing this for 1 or 2 years, and they aren't using any housing authority homes or are not in the buffer area either. So how would a project like this score? It's still providing affordable units. It's still improving the quality of some of the homes in a target neighborhood. This one scored 57 in the hypothetical scenario. This doesn't mean that it's a bad project. It means that it doesn't meet as many of the priorities, that the developer may not be as ready as the other hypothetical applicant here. It may be a project that rises to the top in a year, depending on what kinds of projects are coming in. And it's also a project where, the committee could say to staff, like, let's work with this developer to shore up financing, get them acquired, get some other things checked so it scores better and they feel more comfortable funding the project. But the scoring is really a guide for that initial conversation, the initial lens to look through it. The scoring is not the end all be all of decision making. Are there any reactions or thoughts?
This is Valerie. I just hope that from a DEI perspective that we do make this process or scoring equitable, particularly for those minority folks who may apply and may have the capacity to do it. They just may be lacking in one particular area. So I do hope that there is some thought process put into that from an equitable perspective.
Thank you.
Good point, Valerie. It's Takita again. Okay, so I was just wondering, as far as for the new developer, under the list you had where it's a new developer, I was hoping that it's not just the scoring. So for instance, if you have a new developer and they maybe haven't been in business very long, maybe a couple of years, but they have the plans, they have the specs, they have the funding, everything is in place. Maybe they have not, built as long. So I'm glad to hear you say that it's not just the scoring. It's not the end all be all. So that's good to hear.
Thank you. And that's been a big part of the conversation, both in Omaha and Tulsa, as they're working to expand who's doing the work. In Tulsa, they're a little behind because of staffing, but they have, I'm blanking on what they call it, but helping build the capacity of small, local, and minority developers who don't initially have access to the capital you need to start a project and so forth. So it's kind of, because there aren't enough developers in a lot of communities to do the work, and helping build those smaller local and minority developers to help do the work.
Well, the developers that are applying for funds, I know that within ARPA and even within the city's guidelines, there are some measures that a developer or contractor has to hit. So like they have to be insured, those sorts of things. Is that going to flow over into this, or can you have like a handyman service who may not meet all of those contractor markers apply for funding and potentially be awarded funding?
Good question.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I think for like my idea around at least like a home repair program is maybe there are some kind of like a developer, like a newer handyman service that does quality work. They just don't have. Right. Right. Yeah.
In that situation, I mean, it would be great for them to come under an experienced developer who can cover those things and then provide the opportunity to the newbie. But yeah, bonding and insurance is going to definitely be an issue.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking the city's risk assessment.
I
ARPA has some of those provisions in there as well for the types of contractors that can issue work. So that was kind of my thought process. Maybe just a side note is that there is a section within the ARPA funding documentation from the Fed that talks about eligible contractors.
Okay.
So, I mean, as you guys move forward with this work, that might just be a section to brush or use for administrative decision making.
And putting that information out. Right. Putting that information out ahead that is definitely a requirement because we don't want to waste people's time.
Point. Do you remember the section number? Yeah. It's in there. Any other thoughts or concerns? Really good points and discussion.
Well, while Justin's catching up there, I do want to point out that in my neighborhood, it looks like there's an appliance person who's now operating as a GC contractor, and it's kind of an interesting project to say the least. So
Anything else? So we started with the statement that we hope to reach consensus that this recommendation, with some of the refinements we've been talking about, there are definitely some things to add. Are you comfortable moving forward with this as a recommendation to the city manager to begin to move forward with the process of forming an affordable housing fund and going to council and going through the public process to get this implemented, knowing it will continue to evolve and refine, and city council and could find things in this they don't like, but we need to move forward. Is there any, I guess, is there hesitation? That would be a good time to, is that the right question, Justin?
Andy, the way I've always seen it phrased is this something you can live with right now, knowing that the conversation is going to continue, but you as a committee member, is this something you can live with? Was option 2.
Generally,
That includes. And that includes some new construction as well, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
so generally this is like option 2 that we spoke about before. We added single family new construction as an eligible use, and through the discussion and some of the best practices at the other funds, we aren't prescribing like $2 million to this. We want to see what applications come in and see where the development community and service providers see the need and opportunity. Okay. With that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the next steps, unless there are other, and you can stop me if there's something you think about can we live with this and move forward? Yeah.
Just wondering, maybe I missed it, but is there more, or this might be something to get in because it's part of the longer term, but I guess just a little bit more clarification on the sustainability of the fund. And what, because I know we've talked about the Wichita Housing Authority homes, just generally that they're, we could have the proceeds from that possibly reroute back into the fund. But do we have any like targets as far as, when the ARPA funds are out, what we need to sustain it in the long term?
Generally, that is a conversation that needs to happen. And I would encourage any committee members or community members to continue to tell council that's a priority. Some can be funded out of general fund annually. It's not very common. Some are funded by as part of a bond issue or special tax. But a lot have this conversation about, okay, we got seed money and we got to start. How do we keep it up? What are the partners that might contribute, philanthropy, et cetera? It's a very important conversation. And I would say since we started, it's evolved. We thought we just knew that we had $5 million over basically a couple of years and hopefully get support. It's important to do it well and transparently to launch. And I know I don't want to speak for Sally, but our conversations is she's thinking about that, and it's one of the opportunities with the Housing Authority homes to get whatever level that comes in at. Is something a lot of communities don't have.
I think we'd all love to match that. Just finding the funding source is definitely the challenge. I hate to say it, but Build Back Better provides possible opportunities going forward. So, reach out to your congressional members, because that could be definitely be a source that could help to replenish the fund. Without a stable source of funding, this will dry up. Mind you, yes, the opportunity with the WHA homes lets it go a little bit longer. But especially with the ARPA funds, because we are required to pretty much sunset those in 2026, they can't cycle back through. So we would actually have to have some sort of additional funding. Like Andy said, often done through bond issuances or special taxes, which do not go over well in this community. I've seen other communities also use fees from closings, where they have that then funds an affordable housing fund. It takes being creative, but I love all the attention on it at the moment, to be honest with you. Any other thoughts, Scott?
No, I think it's been a good discussion about this initial allotment of $5 million and how do we kind of are we able to keep it at $5 million going forward, and what have other communities done?
And I'll add, in terms of our next steps, is we're going to refine the memo to reflect some of the really great points and thoughtfulness that was added this evening. I think we'll send it back out, and then we're going to work with city manager and staff to figure out about presenting the recommendations to council.
Recommendations to council, sorry, I know. Those recommendations to council, are you also going to presenting your for the committee that will review? Or is that something that you anticipate on presenting to them after they have signed off on the initial plan?
How that gets developed.
Right.
I don't know that we'd want to put too much work into that up front, because they usually do kind of have an idea of how they want that structured.
What will be included is the recommendation about, that Valerie raised about community leaders that reflect the focus areas for these funds, the community we want to impact. I know I keep talking about Tulsa, but we've been working closely with them, and their review committee was, they did some political battles to form it, but it is mostly minority individuals who are leaders in the community and have broad experience in community development or development. And that's a really fantastic group. Their discussions are wonderful around all of these things. Any other thoughts or questions?
Just before we close, I'm wondering if we want to take public comments, because
That's where I was going. Great minds, right? Are there any comments from the broader public?
My name is Lonnie Barnes. Yeah, I think you guys work you put it into this here. Was really impressed with your alternate proposal as far as that matrix in here. What it tells me, guys, is that I've looked at the area and the area in which you're looking development here, and a lot of these are pre-existing homes. You talk about new construction. There's not a lot of new construction in here other than Mennonite housing and Habitat for Home, and they're limited even within the parameters which they can work. So when you start looking at smaller contractors and people able to come in and do repairs, because that's what you have now is a lot of those in here. How do we help facilitate and grow those? I give you an example. When you go by Wichita State and RFQs they send out for developers to come in, there's not a minority developer or contractor or business that can afford to even come into that area and meet those requirements in here. So you're already narrowing those people out. But there's a lot of individuals in there who can come in. I'll be one of them myself. They can come in and be substantially able to do some of these things with the support of that. And so there's more of us than there are those that can come in and do it by themselves.
Thank you.
You talked next steps. Do you have any idea on timeline when this would be presented to council? You know, when presented to district advisory boards, that kind of thing?
Other than January for council, I'm not sure. Not at this point. Anything else? I just want to thank you all and the other committee members for your time and commitment and really great and challenging conversation throughout this process. I hope that there will be a way for you all to continue to be involved moving forward, and I suspect a lot of you will. So I just want to thank you very much, and that's all. This has been a very interesting and challenging project, and I'm honored to be a part of it as a Wichita native and somebody who is passionate about affordable housing. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.